So moving on. Climate change. Never in the history of the environmental movement has a topic gained as much public attention as climate change. Betul. Setiap hari kita selalu dengar pasal climate change, climate change, climate change. However, this attention has been focused almost entirely on ways in which society stands to suffer from its consequences. So, the response has been an increased focus on the mitigation of climate change through measures centered around limiting the procurement and combustion of fossil fuels and artificial means of adapting to it. So significantly less mainstream attention has been given to the effects of climate change on the biodiversity, as well as the way in which biodiversity conservation can help in mitigation, adaptation and also resilience. So again, you dah tahu kan, you dah understand what is biodiversity, you dah tahu dah kenapa biodiversity ekosistem ni sangat penting, and then sekarang kita nak tengok climate change. Apa relationship between biodiversity ni dengan climate change? So, kita kena tahulah kan, apa penyebab dia, apa kesan dia dan apa tindakan yang diperlukan untuk orang kata apa, untuk mengurangkan climate change ni. Number one, the causes of climate change is due to the burning of fossil fuel. So basically, the burning of fossil fuel has been identified as the primary cause of anthropogenic climate change. So again, anthropogenic ni adalah satu orang kata apa, term dalam sustainable development lah. So scientists, they refer anthropogenic ni to the environmental change that caused by human activity. Dengar by human activity, dah tak ada by any species, dah human activity je. So this is intensified by other human activities such as deforestation and large-scale commercial agriculture, both of which cause a massive release of carbon dioxide and any other greenhouse gases into the atmospheres that prevent a steadily increased quantity of heat from the sun rays from being reflected back into space. So again, macam saya cakap tadi kan, carbon dioxide tu merupakan satu gas yang telah terperangkap dekat atmosfer kita. Jadinya kita tak ada cara lain, kita kena kurangkan the activity of deforestation and also our commercial agriculture. So bila, macam saya cakap tadi lah kan, bila carbon dioxide tu, dia dah tak boleh nak pergi dekat laut, dia akan pergi masuk tanah. So bila dia masuk tanah, dia terlalu panas, dia akan menyebabkan kebakaran lah dalam hutan. And then dekat sini dia kata apa? The increasing quantity of heat from the sun. Sebab itulah sekarang orang sangat particular tentang UV, betul tak? Kan sinaran UV matahari. Mungkin dulu dah elok lah, mungkin konon vitamin D lah, vitamin C lah. Sekarang wallahualam, kita pun tak tahu kan the quality of the sun heat is actually benefit for the human or not. Next, the anthropogenic infusion, again lah, the environmental changes lah of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, among other complex resulting the human behavior, are causing the imbalance in the earth climate change. So contohnya macam menyebabkan musim kemarau, flooding, tornadoes, and there is an increase of unpredictability of this event. For example, like unseasonal rain or kemarau. Contoh sepatutnya sekarang musim hujan tapi tak hujan. Sekarang musim kemarau tapi tak ada kemarau. Itu disebabkan kita punya climate change tu dah tak balance. So as well as it will lead to the gradual average increase in the temperature around the world. So mungkin dulu dekat sebelah kutub utara kan, kutub utara air glacier ataupun ais kat sana masih lagi remain stagnant, okey lagi, tapi sekarang dah makin cair apa semua kan. So the higher temperature is melting terrestrial ice, resulting in the sea level rise and the wider spread of disease, for example like disease carrying organism typical of warmer region such as mosquito are being spread to other areas. And then bila contoh, sebab itulah makin lama makin menipik-gipik je nyamuk yang kita jumpa. Betul tak? Zika lah, macam-macam lah. Nyamuk tu mungkin dulu saiz kecil, sekarang dah saiz besar. Ada satu nyamuk tu saya tak tahulah. Nyamuk tu pun macam rupa dia punya macam rupa nyamuk Zika tapi dia besar sikit macam tu. So disebabkan kata apa berlakunya climate change ni boleh berlakunya lah spesies-spesies yang kurang menyenangkan kita. Contohnya, and then bila spesies-spesies, contohnya macam nyamuk ni kan, nyamuk ni dulu kecil jadi besar. Lepas tu nyamuk ni pula terbang pula dekat Afrika. Terbang pula dekat Afrika. Afrika pula tak ada sistem sanitation ataupun water treatment system yang sangat bagus. Jadi kerajaan mereka tak boleh lah nak kawal kesihatan rakyat tu. So berlakulah penyakit-penyakit denggi, penyakit-penyakit malaria, penyakit-penyakit klorea. Tapi dekat dalam Malaysia tak ada lagi lah malaria dengan klorea ni, betul tak? Kan? Kalau kita ada teruk lah tu. Tapi yang ni basically dia sangat famous dekat Afrika lah. Especially yang klorea ni dia sampai mengakibatkan kematian. Tapi denggi pun boleh menyebabkan kematian. So itulah kita kata dengan the causes of climate change. Number 1, due to the burning of fossil fuel. Number 2, due to the excessive greenhouse gases. Number 3, the higher temperature of the sea level. So itu kita kata dengan the causes lah. Moving on, ini adalah diagram lah kan, nak tunjuk macam mana carbon dioxide tu punya direction. So number 1, carbon is stored in the vegetation, dalam tumbuh-tumbuhan kan. So the greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere via respiration of animals and plants. Betul lah, betul tak? Kita manusia keluarkan keluarkan carbon dioxide, tumbuh-tumbuhan keluarkan oksigen. So kita kena apa? Kita kena bagi mereka kita punya carbon dioxide, kita akan sedut mereka punya oksigen. And moving on, carbon is stored in the soil. So turun bawah dekat soil tu. So decaying plants and other matter produce carbon and other greenhouse gases. So carbon is stored in the fossil fuel. Lepas tu dia naik pula atas. Carbon is absorbed by the plants via photosynthesis. So you dah belajar kan photosynthesis punya proses. So greenhouse gases are released into the atmosphere when the fossil fuel are burned. Contohnya macam traktor tu lah. Kalau dekat bandar, dekat pekan, kereta-kereta, bas, lori kan. So gas carbon dioxide tu naik ke atas udara. So carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are abundant in the atmosphere. Abundant tu maksudnya dah memang dekat atas lah, dah terperangkap. Moving on, kita nak tengok pula impact. Tadi kita dah tengok causes kan, kita dah tengok penyebab ataupun faktor-faktor climate change. Sekarang kita nak tengok kesan dia pula. So kesan dia yang pertama adalah increase of temperature. So since the mid of 80s, the average global temperature has increased by about 0.6 degrees and currently projected to increase between 1.5 degree and 5.8 degrees Celsius over the course of the next 100 years. Makin lama makin tinggi sebab population pun makin ramai. Number 2, the impacts of climate change is continued retreat of glaciers and ice cap. Ni lah saya cakap tadi tu kan. Ais dekat kutub utara makin cair. So putting a population at risk of flood and depriving them of water resources in the long term. So number 3, rise of the sea level. Tadi increase temperature, sekarang kenaikan paras laut. So by 0.09 meter to 0.8 meter you ambil lah pembaris between 1990 and 2100. So paras laut, the sea level akan naik sebanyak 0.8 meter setiap tahun. So the number 4, the impacts of climate change due to the widespread droughts and crop failures. Kegagalan kita untuk untuk sustain kita punya tumbuh-tumbuhan, livestock, and menyebab yalah betul lah, kegagalan kita untuk sustain kita punya plants, livestock and pollinator, dia akan menyebabkan increase in malnutrition and starvation lah. Contohnya macam berlakunya musim kemarau kan. Musim kemarau, bila musim kemarau tak ada tumbuh-tumbuhan, betul tak? Tak ada tumbuh-tumbuhan hidup. So bila tak ada tumbuh-tumbuhan hidup, dia akan efek kepada food security lah, kepada sesebuah region. So ini adalah impacts of climate change. So kita tengok pula dekat dalam diagram ni kan. So Earth average global temperature is scaling new heights. The sea ice is retreating. Extreme weather events have become more frequent and species are increasingly under threat. So again kat sini, species are being affected. There are several ice sheet has been lost in Arctic. There was a abnormal temperature happen in Russia. And then dekat kita sendiri, kat Southeast Asia region, the weather is very extremely panas. Panas, kejap hujan. And then berlakunya sea level rise. And then ada berlakunya greenhouse gas effect. So these are the impacts of climate change. Moving on, kita nak tengok actions pula kan, action. So, the IPCC tu stand for Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So, siapa IPCC ni? So, IPCC ni is an intergovernment body under United Nations that actually responsible in carrying out the scientific assessment on climate change. So, IPCC ni lah yang akan buat research, yang akan keluarkan data, yang akan keluarkan dengan policy, keluarkan dengan adaptation method, apa yang these 193 United Nations members need to adopt in order for us to reduce the climate change lah. So the IPCC has projected that the average global temperature will increase by between an additional 1.4 degrees Celsius to 5.8 lah tadilah kan, by 2100 if no actions are taken. So the temperature will rise anywhere within the relatively short space of 1 century is likely to have catastrophic consequences in our life lah. So more scientists agree that the global temperature rise should be limited to no more than 2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level, since the available evidence that has been proposed ataupun that has been stated in the local government climate roadmap. You boleh tengok you boleh Google local government climate roadmap by OECD. So again, according to this local government climate roadmap, the impacts of climate change have expanded to such extent. Even if we could stop all this emission now, the changes will continue in the future. So nak tak nak pun kita tak boleh nak deter terus climate change, tapi kita boleh reduce. Kita boleh reduce lah. The major effort must be made is to reduce the emission towards the cleaner and renewable energy resources. And at the same time, according to the local government climate roadmap, we must increase the adaptation and resilient effort. As we will to see further in the paper, biodiversity is not only affected by the climate change but also contribute very significantly towards the effectiveness of mitigation and adaptation effort. So, apa yang saya boleh conclude kat sini, both international and domestic supply chain have been disrupted by climate change lah, macam IPCC cakap kan. So supply chain ni kita boleh refer kepada our critical industry lah. For example like housing industry, construction industry, semiconductor industry, agriculture industry. Can you imagine sekarang kan, kalau you baca lah mana-mana kan, kilang apa semua, the cost material untuk produce satu barang tu dah makin meningkat, betul tak? kan, demand tu tinggi. Demand contohnya macam industri semiconductor, semiconductor ni macam panel lah, wire, kabel, fiber optik apa semua tau. In order for a kilang, for a manufacturer untuk produce di satu kabel wire ni sangatlah mahal, sangat cost tau. Cost material tu semakin tinggi. Kenapa? Sebab supply tu dah semakin berkurangan. So inilah dikatakan dengan our critical industry has been disrupted by the climate change. So for example dekat China, China punya roadmap sekarang ni, they actually emphasize on their carbon capture, ataupun kita kata tadi tu lah, carbon sequestration tadi tu. Sebab kat China sekarang ni isu banjir tu dah jadi satu, orang kata apa, satu ketakutan bagi mereka. Jadi mereka come up with their roadmap on carbon capture and also storage carbon lah, ataupun kita kata tadi carbon sequestration tadi tu. Macam dekat Indonesia pula dia ada pula roadmap dia orang tentang low carbon and also climate resilience. So apa-apa pun kerajaan dalam sesebuah negara tu perlu mainkan peranan lah kan, tentang meningkatkan the adaptation and also the resilient effort in order for us to achieve the effectiveness of mitigation and adaptation effort. Kalau tak, habislah kita kan. Macam mana negara mana nak melabur dekat dalam Malaysia kan, nak producekan semiconductors. Bila kita tak ada that kind of effort, dia akan menjejaskan ekonomi kita. So bila kita terjejas ekonomi, investor akan lari. So investor dah tak nak dah melabur dekat dalam Malaysia. So macam mana kita nak sustain kita punya economic, betul tak kan? So bila kita kata pasal ekonomi ni pula, dia sangatlah panjang. Dia akan bukan melibatkan mata wang, bukan melibatkan mata wang sahaja, tapi dia melibatkan unemployment rate dekat dalam sesebuah negara. So itulah kita kata dengan pelan tindakan yang perlu diambil oleh sesebuah kerajaan negara dalam meningkatkan the adaptation and also the resilient efforts towards the climate change. Okay. So there are 5 barriers in order for us to achieve the effective climate adaptation. So apakah kita nak tengoklah kan, apakah halangan ataupun cabaran untuk kita adapt an effective climate change punya policy. Apakah halangan ni sebenarnya? Number 1, due to the information barriers, kekangan dari segi informasi. So we need a consistent and also we need an accessible information and the capacity to apply. It is essential for an effective adaptation. So kita perlu kita perlu dapatkan banyak maklumat lah daripada IPCC tu kan, tentang climate change. Macam mana, bagaimana, apakah pelan tindakan yang sewajarnya yang kita boleh ambil and kita adapt dalam Malaysia. So number 2, dari segi kekangan kognitif, barriers. So psychological factors does influence our ability to act on our information about climate change, including our perception of how urgent this adaptation is. So, itu dari segi nombor 2 lah, cognitive barriers. Number 3, due to the disincentive for self-preparedness. So, even if the risk posed by climate change and options to adapt are understood, okay, walaupun kita faham apa nak kena buat A, B, C, D, E, kita faham, markets may not always generate the right signal for individual and businesses to prepare for climate change. Again, siapa je yang nak surrenderkan dia punya profits, betul tak? In order for us to reduce the climate change. No such thing. So, number 4, due to the investment barriers, limiting the investment in adaptation for major assets such as road, rails and ports, because the benefits of doing so are outside the scope and the time frame of the private sector investment decision. Itu adalah merupakan salah satu halangan dari sudut ekonomi. And last but not least, the barrier to effective climate adaptation is because of the transaction costs and also externalities. So these costs are very very high. So coordinating adaptation across the regions can be costly and resulting in the unintended consequences. So daripada nombor 1 sampai 5 ni senang cerita kan. You boleh tengok kita punya ECRL project. You boleh tengok OBO initiative by China, One Belt One Road kan. How this initiative is actually benefiting us in terms of this environmental. These are the five barrier lah that need to be identified by the policy maker, especially policy maker that are very expert in the environmental law, and then you all sebagai future policy maker dalam environmental policy juga perlu ambil tahulah kan. Perlu tahu, oh rupanya inilah cabaran-cabaran kepada kita sebagai policy maker in the future untuk adapt this climate change policy. So itu sahaja untuk subtopik pada hari ini.